welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, August 7th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. Ali Abunimah is off this week. It's day 306 as we enter the 11th month of Israel's genocide in Gaza. We have an important show coming up for you today. We'll have a discussion with author and political analyst Helena Cobban of Just World Educational to talk about the regional developments and an escalation of this war, and a new book she has co-edited, Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters, which is coming out in a few weeks. Later on in the program, Jon will cover the latest resistance news with a focus on Rafah, South Lebanon, and the Yemenis downing another U.S. Reaper drone. But first, here's a summary of some of the latest developments in Gaza and the region. And we'll also share some reportage highlights from the Electronic Intifada's contributors there. Israel bombed 3 separate United Nations schools operating as shelters for displaced people over the weekend in Gaza City. On Saturday, at least 17 Palestinians were killed when Israel bombed the Hamama school in the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood.
يا اخوان حدش يتحرك ابويا الخليفه ابويا القدمش ابويا القدمش.
On Sunday, at least 30 Palestinians were killed in attacks on the Al-Nasr and Hassan Salama schools. The Gaza government media office said that the Israeli army has so far targeted more than 170 shelters across Gaza since October, including 152 public and UN schools. The media office stated, quote, the Israeli occupation army focuses greatly on targeting and bombing displaced civilians inside schools and also targets gatherings of displaced civilians in general, especially in areas that the occupation claims are, quote, safe areas, according to a deliberate and planned plan aimed at premeditated killing and achieving the greatest possible number of civilian casualties. Israeli forces also bombed the courtyard of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Balah at dawn on Saturday, targeting the tents of thousands of displaced people seeking shelter. A fire spread through the tent encampment. At least 5 people were killed and dozens were injured. Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, stated that, quote, since March, the Al-Aqsa hospital compound has been struck 3 times, each time injuring and killing people. On March 31st, an Israeli strike hit the yard of the hospital compound. On July 22nd, another strike hit near the main entrance to the emergency department. Yesterday, Israeli aircraft targeted a home in Deir al-Balah in the center. Journalist Maha Husseini said that the bomb did not explode, but she says, quote, as people gathered around to evacuate the residents, a second bomb was dropped, which exploded and devastated the entire neighborhood. A third bomb was dropped a few minutes later. At least 2 Palestinians were killed and many others were injured. Another strike targeted a nearby area where displaced Palestinians have set up tents. The government media office in Gaza said on Tuesday that the number of journalists killed in the territory since last October now stands at 166 after an Israeli attack killed Mohammed Issa Abu Saada, a correspondent and photographer with several media outlets. The killing of Abu Saada came on the heels of last week's killing of prominent Al Jazeera correspondent Ismail Al-Ghul and cameraman Rami Al-Rifi in an airstrike in Gaza City. Khaled Al-Shawa, a 17-year-old bystander, was also killed in the strike. Our senior editor, Maureen Claire Murphy, reports that Irene Khan, the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Opinion and Expression, condemned the killing of Al-Ghul and Al-Rifi and said, quote, the Israeli military seems to be making accusations without any substantive evidence as a license to kill journalists, which is in total contravention of international humanitarian law. A statement released by Khan noted Israel's, quote, total ban on Al Jazeera in Israel and the vicious smear campaign against the broadcaster, and called for the International Criminal Court to move swiftly to prosecute the killing of journalists as a war crime. For much more on Israel's continued attacks on journalists and recent news from Gaza, read Maureen Claire Murphy's forthcoming report on electronicintifada.net. On Monday, Israel delivered a truck not with aid or medication or food inside, but rather the decomposed bodies of nearly 90 Palestinians. The director of the Palestinian Civil Emergency Service in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza told Al Jazeera on Monday that it was unclear whether the bodies had been dug up from cemeteries by the Israeli army or whether they were detainees who had been tortured and killed. He said that the occupation provided us with no information about the names or ages or anything. This is a war crime, a crime against humanity. Hamas issued a statement saying that the bodies were handed over, quote, in a state of complete decomposition, without any ability to determine their identities. The Gaza government media office stated on Monday, quote, over the course of 304 days of the genocide, the occupation has kidnapped more than 2,000 bodies of martyrs and dead people from dozens of cemeteries in the governorates of the Gaza Strip, which the occupation bulldozed with bulldozers and military vehicles and turned their graves over in scenes that violate humanity. Andrea De Domenico, the head of the Palestine office with the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, addressed the press last week. Over the past 300 days, he said he has witnessed, quote, the absolute physical and psychological exhaustion of an entire population, and said that the people in Gaza have been deprived of the mere thinking of what tomorrow could bring for them, warning that we cannot allow ourselves to become immune to horror. He added that due to heavy access impediments and widespread security risks, ongoing aid efforts continue to fall short of the enormous needs in Gaza, which has become a graveyard for children, as UN Secretary General had warned. Razan Abu Salem and Khaled al-Hissi wrote about the trauma endured by children who have so far survived 10 months of genocide. Ghazal, a 6-year-old girl, screams when she hears an explosion or any other loud noise, they write. When a bombardment occurs at night, she insists on sleeping in her father's arms. She's traumatized by how Israel killed her uncle in the early stages of the current genocidal war. Ghazal keeps asking, where did they take Uncle Basil when he was sleeping? In mid-January, the Israeli military surrounded with tanks the Khan Yunis school where Ghazal and her family were sheltering. The Israelis ordered everyone to leave the school within 15 minutes. We went through the checkpoints and walked for 8 hours with corpses lying on the ground all along the way, Ghazal's mother said. I don't want to die, Ghazal said repeatedly as she saw dead bodies. I don't want to die like them. I am a child. Omar, a 5-year-old, was rescued from under the rubble in February. He's the only surviving member of his family. When he was brought to Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Balah, doctors decided that he required an arm and leg amputation. As his parents have been killed, Omar's aunt Maha is now taking care of him. He keeps asking where his mom and dad are. Maha does not know what to tell him. Omar has spoken about how he saw his sister Yasmin without a head following the attack on the family. He's only 5, Maha said. What did Omar do to those soldiers? Why have they destroyed his life? For almost 10 months, Israel has been attacking Gaza. The pain has been horrific for everyone, especially children. For the full story, read Razan Abu Salem and Khaled al-Hissi's feature, Children Traumatized by 10 Months of Genocide, on electronicintifada.net. And Nada Hamdouna, a new writer for the Electronic Intifada, writes that she had dreamed of becoming a translator, mastering different languages and traveling to discover new cultures. But she says, now I only dream of surviving. She writes that in March 2024, when the Israeli military withdrew from Al-Amoudi in northwestern Gaza, my family and I returned to see if our house was still standing. The shock was immense when we found that the house had been bombed and was all burned up. We sat down to process our loss, and once we regained our senses, we searched inside what was left of the house. After 3 hours of searching, I found a precious gift given to me by my grandmother before she died, a bottle of perfume. It was a surprise to find this, and I thought I might find more. Then there was an explosion in the house. All I remember is dust and smoke filling the ruins of our home. I was disoriented and didn't know what was happening. My hand was bleeding. My family and I called out to each other. When we finally found each other, we were all in shock. We found my cousin Isa lying on the ground, his body pocked with small holes and his eyes not where they were supposed to be. There was no taxi or car to take us to the hospital, and since the cell phone networks were down, we couldn't call for an ambulance. My father carried Isa, running around 1.5 kilometers to the hospital. But when he arrived, Isa was dead. He was only 15 years old. We believe it was an unexploded munition that killed him. We took him to the cemetery to bury him, and we recited the verses from the Quran. But my brothers couldn't say goodbye to Isa. They couldn't accept he was dead. I survived the explosion physically, but I do not think I survived it psychologically. For the full story, read Nada Hamdouna's feature, Israeli Ordnance Kills Long After Initial Impact, on electronicintifada.net. And turning to the occupied West Bank, Israel raided Jenin on Monday and Tuesday, killing at least 8 Palestinians and destroying homes and bulldozing streets inside the Jenin refugee camp. Children in Jenin attempted to take down an Israeli surveillance drone during the Israeli army raid on Monday.
امسكها
4 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces in Aqaba, near Tubas, also in the northern West Bank. Israeli settlers rampaged through the village of Yatma, near Nablus, setting fire to cars. Other settler mobs attacked and set fire to areas near Bethlehem. And finally, we wanted to bring you some images and videos from journalists and others in Gaza that highlight the resilience, joy, and determination of the Palestinian people, and specifically children, this week. Journalist Maha Husseini posted this video of kids having fun in a displacement camp in Deir al-Balah. An artist, Mohammed Ahmed, painted children's faces at a displacement camp, also in Deir al-Balah.
ايش بدك اللون؟ ابيض وزاهر موفي.
And Mohammed Hussein on Twitter at Athamna Ahmad, ATHAMNAAHMAD, posted this video of himself playing with his young children with the caption, "As the world shares in our sorrow in Gaza, we also ask you to share in our moments of hope. In this video, amidst the shelling, I play with my children on top of our tent. We long for peace and safety, clinging to the hope that freedom's sun will rise and this war will end." And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. And you're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with Asa Winstanley. Hi, Asa.
Hi, Nora. It's quite something to see those small scenes of hope for Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, it's hard even from here to see where the hope is. You know, we're seeing, I can't believe we're now going into the 11th month of this genocide, and just, it's become so normalized here in the West. And this is just something that, you know, in the words of Aaron Bushnell, like, that our ruling class has decided will be normal.
Yeah.
You know, it's really sickening, and it's hard to see the hope. And yet we have to carry on, and we have to keep on doing what we're doing. You know, I guess when we're despairing, I guess I try and think of Palestinians in Gaza who must go through so much despair and yet still find some way to carry on. I don't know how they do it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no other way to do it. Well, we have a full show today, and so much to cover. It's been a really tense week. It's been another week of horrors and brutal attacks, as we laid out in the news report. And of course, this comes on the heels of the assassination last week of Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, which came just hours after Israel assassinated Fuad Shukr, a top-level Hizballah commander, in an attack in Beirut. The region is closer, as Ali Abunimah wrote, to an all-out war that Israel claims it does not want, but seems to be doing everything in its power to provoke. Both Iran and Hezbollah have vowed a harsh response, but have refrained from announcing details about when it may come and what form it may take. In a speech Tuesday, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah said the anxious wait imposed on Israel was part of its punishment. Israel's whole economy and society were effectively on hold. He also noted that Israel, while still strong, is much weaker than it used to be. Unable to defend itself and deter its enemies on its own, Tel Aviv must increasingly rely on the United States, European countries, and even Arab regimes to come to its rescue. Setting out a broad analysis of the regional picture, Nasrallah emphasized that at this stage, the priority for the resistance axis must be to prevent an Israeli victory against the Palestinian resistance. The Hezbollah leader warned that if the Palestinian resistance were to be defeated, nothing would stand in the way of Israel's plans to annex the occupied West Bank and exterminate or expel the Palestinian people to Jordan. No state in the region, especially Lebanon, would be safe, Nasrallah said. And yesterday, Hamas named Yahya Sinwar as its new Politburo leader following the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, in a move that the political party said was made unanimously and with full consensus. Joining us to talk about all of this and to help make sense of what comes next is Helena Cobban. Helena is a writer and author with decades of experience and knowledge about the region. She's also the director of Just World Educational. She and Rami Khoury have co-edited a new book based on Just World's latest project, Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters, which will be published at the end of the month by OR Books. We'll get more into that later on. Helena, thank you so much for coming back on the live stream. It's so good to have you at such a critical time.
Well, it's great to be with all you guys. You've just done the most amazing job week after week, as you said. Like, who would have thought? Like, 10 months.
Yeah. It's hard to understand every day. Well, you've reported from the region and on the region for decades. You were in South Lebanon in the 70s and 80s. You've also interviewed both Ismail Haniyeh and Khaled Meshal about Hamas and the ongoing political formations against Israel's settler colonial project in Palestine. Give us your sense, first off, of the significance of Haniyeh's assassination in terms of the immediate and the long-term aftermath and consequences.
Oh boy! how many hours?
In a few words, yeah.
You got? Okay, so the first thing I would say, since I'm here in Washington D.C. on the traditional lands of the Piscataways, is that the United States, since the late 1970s, has totally monopolized all peacemaking diplomacy on the Arab-Israeli front in that theater, and continues to do so until today. And it has been monopolizing the negotiations, the diplomacy over a ceasefire and release of detainees and hostages completely. It's been a U.S.-led negotiation, and then the Israelis go and assassinate the leader of the other party, Hamas. So this was a huge provocation, not just to Palestinians, not just to Iranians, because of course it happened in the capital of Iran when Haniya was visiting for the inauguration of Iran's new president. So, that was a huge provocation, but it was also a provocation to the United States because it completely undermines, the integrity, okay, I say that in scare quotes, of the US mediation effort. So it's just like poking President Biden in the eye or in a much more sensitive part of his anatomy, honestly. And what does he do? He does nothing except he says, oh, let's not have any further escalation. Like what the Israelis did last Tuesday, Wednesday night, right at the end of July, that was not an escalation. Of course it was, So to me, it's, okay, that's the biggest thing it's done. It's proven the degree to which Biden is not prepared to stand up to Netanyahu at all. I have a colleague, I forget who said that it's really an attempt to continue grooming Biden and the whole of the US political system to go along with the abuse, in the way that an abusive spouse grooms his targets. And that's exactly what's happening here.
But like as if he would want to stand up to Netanyahu. I mean, there's that dynamic that, the US is not even, doing the finger wagging while sending, more weapons. They're just sending more weapons. They're just sending these warships to the region and then saying, that they want to de-escalate. I mean, this is like classic American imperialist behavior, right?
Yeah. So you're right. They themselves take escalatory actions and they don't hold Israel to account at all for the, any of this like horrendous procession of escalatory actions that Israel has been taking for the last 76 years. The only time they really stood up to the Israelis was Eisenhower in 1956, when Eisenhower told the Israelis, the English and the French, to go back and, to stop their aggression against Egypt. And intriguingly, that marked the birth of AIPAC in this country. AIPAC was founded by Maurice Amité and other people to ensure that 1956, what Eisenhower did that year, would never happen again.
That was also the birth of Labour Friends of Israel, incidentally. As I'm sure you know, Helena, but maybe not all our viewers and listeners do, the Israel lobby in the UK is a slightly different configuration. There's no one mega AIPAC. There is a kind of an equivalent organisation called BICOM, but it's much smaller. It's more of a think tank. The political lobbying organisations are split by political party. And of course, right now, the most relevant one is Labour Friends of Israel. And they were born exactly the same moment. So that's really really interesting historical point. They were, because in 1956, of course, the Labour Party, even the so-called left of the Labour Party, were incredibly pro-Israel, quite deeply Zionist. But in 1956, the tripartite aggression against Egypt was too much for even some of them, for some of the Zionist politicians within the Labour Party, and there was some sort of minor critical rumblings against Israel, the sort of, well, this is bad for Israeli interests kind of thing, right, on those kind of levels. And so that was why Labour Friends of Israel was founded, because it was meant to shore up and get that support back. So it's interesting to hear that there was a similar phenomenon over the Atlantic at exactly the same time with the foundation of AIPAC. I don't think I was aware of that.
Yeah, and of course AIPAC is still this massive force and has just taken down Cori Bush in Missouri. Cori Bush, who came to prominence and entered politics as the result of the Black Lives Matter movement and what had happened in Ferguson, Missouri. So, and the lobby here, AIPAC, has been crowing about the extent to which it was their support that brought her down. So, yeah, and I mean,
they're boasting about it, and then at the same time they'll call you anti-Semitic for saying that the Israel lobby has an influence.
Yeah. Well, there is that. So, getting back to the question of the effects of Haniya's killing, which I didn't quite finish what I was going to say, is that obviously one of the first things that happened was the head of U.S. CENTCOM, General Eric Kurila, went to Israel and sat down with the war criminal Yoav Gallant very early on. And what happened in Tehran at the same time was that the head of Russia's National Security Council, the former defense minister, I forget his first name, but he's Shoigu, General Shoigu, went to Tehran and has been coordinating with the Iranians. So clearly this confrontation that is looming in the region in West Asia has massive geopolitical impact. And we don't know what it's going to be. What I can recall is that in April, after the Israelis on April the 1st launched that first, well, not the first, but a significant provocation by killing the Iranian Revolutionary Guards people in their embassy in Damascus. That was a huge violation of international law, the Vienna Convention, everything else. And the Iranians waited 12 days before they responded. And they had a very, very smart, sophisticated, multi-pronged response to that. It took them 12 days to do it. This one, I think, of course, in the present case, we had the Israelis killing the military chief of Hizballah in South Beirut, as well as Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. And I think, obviously, there's clear coordination between Hizballah and Iran, which is not to say, and as you noted, I think, Nora, Hizballah and the Iranians may undertake different responses, differently timed. And meantime, the Israelis are, some people say, bracing for what's to come. But I think they are actually scared shitless. Because last time, the April action by the Iranians was extremely smart. They managed to get drones and missiles. They sent them from many different places over the course of hours and hours. And of course, many of those, nearly all of them, got shot down, mainly by the Americans and the Jordanians who were working with the Americans. But that enabled the Iranian controllers of the operation to see, what the capabilities of the air defense operations were, and to put through 2 very significant missiles dead on against Israeli military bases. It's so smart. And it revealed the weaknesses of all this so-called multi-layered David Sling, Iron Dome, all this stuff that the Israelis and Americans have spent years building in order to protect Israel's airspace. So, for now, I think there's an old saying that revenge is a dish best served cold. And I think, that's what the Iranians, that's what Hassan Nasrallah effectively said. And they're just letting the Israelis stew in their terror for a little while. But of course, this is not bringing the genocide in Gaza to an end.
That's right. Well, Helena, what are your thoughts on Yahya Sinwar being named as the new leader, the new top leader of Hamas? And this is to replace Ismail Haniyeh. Ismail Haniyeh, of course, was more of a politician, more of a political figure, even though, a reconciliator. I'm sure you remember just as well as I do, Helena, back in 2006, of course, he was elected the leader of the Palestinian Authority, and he still remained with a large degree of popular support amongst Palestinians right up until his death. Yahya Sinwar is not so much of a politician. He's somebody, he's still within the political wing of Hamas, but he's somebody who is viewed as having very close ties to the military wing of Hamas. And he, of course, is based in Gaza itself, whereas the previous political leaders of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh and Khalid Mashal, before him, were both based in Qatar, and before the war in Syria in Damascus. What are your thoughts? What you've interviewed Ismail Haniyeh, and I believe Khalid Mashal as well. Is that right?
That's right. I haven't interviewed Yahya Sinwar.
What are your thoughts on the message that Hamas is trying to send by this new appointment? So
in our the series of webinars that we are about to publish as a book, we had really good conversations with 5 people who have studied Hamas very deeply, much more deeply than either Rami or I, Rami Khouri, who is my co-pilot on this project. And one thing that several of them said is that you shouldn't look at Hamas's internal politics in a binary way. It's not like, the military versus the political, the moderates versus the radicals. It's a very much more complex, interlocking set of constituencies and individuals and grassroots organizations. So I won't give you the whole contents of the book because, of course, I want people to go out and buy it. If you go to the OR Books website, you can get a 15% discount. But obviously, Sinwar and Haniyeh were essentially classmates together at the Islamic University of Gaza. They are both, Gaza. Abner Gaza, they were from the heart and soul of the refugee experience in Gaza. I have for a long time said, ever since I worked on my PLO book back in whenever it was, actually 40 years ago this year, it was published, 1984, that Gaza has been the crucible of every single, Palestinian national liberation movement in modern times. And so for Sinwar and Haniyeh, they were very close, slightly different experiences, but, both of them in and out of jail. Haniyeh left later to go and be in the headquarters, but I don't think there's that much daylight between them. The operational relevance of killing Haniyeh is that, it's a little bit harder for the Qatari and Egyptian diplomats to connect directly with the head of Hamas now that the head of Hamas is in Gaza. But of course, previously, when they were coordinating or, communicating with Haniyeh in Qatar, he always had to coordinate with Sinwar in Gaza. So, this, you could say it complicates things a little bit, but maybe it also in some ways, in terms of the communications involved in this negotiation, simplifies things. Because we know unequivocally that, Yahya Sinwar is the new head of the political bureau. A lot of people like to say Politburo, and then I think, that makes it sound like the Soviet Union. It's very othering to call it the Politburo. I do it myself sometimes.
I guess that might be the idea. But this is an interesting point about the structure of Hamas. They do have this kind of collective leadership.
They certainly do. And, this political bureau has representatives from the Gaza constituency, from the West Bank constituency, from the diaspora Palestinian constituency, and from the prisoners. Prisoners are in just a terrible situation these days. We need to underline that. All prisoners are in a terrible situation. But Khalid Mishal, getting back to the question of the internal politics of Hamas, Khalid Mishal was definitely from the diaspora Palestinian wing of Hamas. He grew up in Jordan, well, diaspora and West Bank, not Gaza. And then he became really politicized in Kuwait when there still was Palestinian political organizing in Kuwait in the late 1980s. So he had a somewhat different trajectory. Who knows how this is going to affect everything? But the political bureau and the political structure of Hamas remains intact. These decapitation actions that Israel takes again and again and again against resistance movements, going back to Ghassan Kanafani and everybody in Fatah back in the 1970s. They don't succeed in wiping out the movement. They don't succeed in rendering the movement, in splitting it or making it inoperable. They strengthen the movement. And, Hamas obviously has survived just terrible waves of decapitation going back to the late 1980s and through the 1990s, and then in the 2000s, they wiped out an entire echelon of Hamas leaders, including, of course, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin and Abdulaziz Rantisi and Ismail Abu Shanab. And so Hamas knows how to survive.
Yeah. And then, of course, Jon will get into this a little bit later, but not just the political bureau and its leadership structure has survived and is resilient, but the fighters in the armed wing are also resilient and they reorganize. Let's kind of talk more about that. Netanyahu says he's adamant about, he says, increasing the military pressure on Hamas to achieve, quote, all of the war's goals. And Israeli media reports say that the government is, quote, confident of U.S. backing in an event of retaliatory strikes. This is from the Jewish Insider. Citing Israeli officials, the report says that there could be a cooperative effort on the part of Israel and allies such as the US and the UK to intercept as many missiles as possible, as occurred during a previous attack by Iran in April. Despite reports of antipathy between Netanyahu and the administration of US President Joe Biden, of course, that's all projection, the United States has thus far refused to consider steps such as suspending arms transfers to Israel, ignoring calls to use U.S. leverage to bring Israel's war on Gaza to an end. And meanwhile, as you write in your latest newsletter, there is an implosion of key Israeli institutions. And to some extent, you write of Jewish Israeli society itself that has recently been unfolding at near warp speed. And we've talked about this with Shir Hever and with Ilan Pappé last week. But what are you looking at right now as Israel seems determined to expand the war while it implodes from within?
Yeah, well, when you say Israel seems determined to do X, Y, or Z, I think, it is so... it's so split down the middle that now you have the Messianics. By the way, that was a super episode you had last week with Ilan Pappé. Really enjoyed that hugely. Learned a lot from it. But so right now you have the Messianics, who are kind of like the Hilltop Youth or whatever, who they are completely out of control. Like that mutiny that riot/mutiny that they fomented. When was it? On the 29th of July. in Sede Teman, trying to prevent the detention of the rapists. This big demonstration in support of the right to rape. I mean, those people they're not marginal in Israeli politics.
This is really astonishing. I think we might have to have a whole live stream on this, to be honest. Maybe next week we'll talk about it more, but it's so... I don't know what to say about it. Like, there's been more news that are just broken about it. This horrific CCTV video of institutionalized rape of Palestinian prisoners by Israeli prison guards going on at these torture facilities. And as you said, there is this large and influential faction of Israeli society and Israeli politicians who are incredibly vocal about making sure this continues. I can't think of a precedent of this in history.
I mean, I've talked since like October the 8th, maybe, Asa and Nora, about Israeli society having become unhinged. And we're seeing this in real time. So these, like the Messianics, the right to rape crowd, they have super high level support within the government from Ben Gvir and from Smotrich. I mean, both of these guys have recently come out with the most outrageous, openly pro-genocidal incitement statements. So, and we used to think back in the late 70s when there were like Likud young men going out and settling on the hilltops in the West Bank or whatever. Oh, it's just young men and they're very marginal. These young men are, number one, they've grown up and they've had children, and their children are just as bad, if not worse. And they are definitely not marginal in the politics of Netanyahu's political survival. So, he is definitely listening to them more than he is to the heads of the army and the various army like intelligence and other bureaus that are saying we cannot win the war in Gaza. You are putting the lives of the remaining hostages in peril by continuing the fighting. So that takes us to another constituency, which is the kind of hostage families constituency, which, Haaretz and the Western media, love to take photos of the marches and the protests and the demonstrations. And they say thousands of people were demonstrating outside Netanyahu's place in Caesarea or whatever. But actually, these people are fairly marginal to Israeli politics right now. They, some of them are wonderful people. Some of them are, just Israeli nationalists who want their family members back. I guess they're represented by Benny Gantz or somebody like that at the political level. And then now you have another constituency, which is the anti-Zionist Haredim, who have been taken for granted for a long time. And after October 7th, there was some real hope from the Zionist nationalists that they could persuade large numbers of the Haredim to enlist or be conscripted or join the military forces. But the attempts to force this to happen, much of which has been spearheaded by the Zionist left, have completely backfired. So, the Haredim in Mea Shearim and other places are massively resisting and also taking over, bursting into military bases in Israel, following the example of the right to rape crowd. So, I mean, in terms of having a military political system that has integrity and clear lines of command and clear goals and a clear strategy, this is all crumbling in Israeli society. And I have to say, it's a very scary situation because the extremists are clearly in control. As we see, with all these young men, some of them American citizens or, French or British citizens who are in the IDF, and they go and they blow up an entire tower block, or the one who blew up the water treatment plant in Rafah, and live streams it and spreads it, to his followers worldwide, as though this is something that we should all think is a glorious action. I mean, these are the people to whom Netanyahu is currently responsible and who are being empowered and enabled within the Israeli military.
Yeah.
And it's not just an aberration either that, as Ilan Pappé has said, and many people have said, that this is just, Smotrich and Ben Gvir and Netanyahu are just like the more honest face of what Israel has always been and what Zionism has always represented. Smotrich, yesterday when, you mentioned these like genocidal statements, Smotrich, I think it was yesterday, time is abstract these days, but this week, he said, yes, starving 2 million Palestinians in Gaza would be the moral thing to do. It's just that the international community won't let us. So saying, the quiet part out loud that Zionists have always said over the last century about trying to exterminate Palestinians. But also like, it's inaccurate to say that the international community won't let Israel starve, because that's what Israel is doing right now.
And the international community is letting
it happen. Exactly. It's just quite an your head just kind of spins with the amount of gaslighting coming from not just the top echelons of the Israeli government, but the Israeli public itself, which is, fighting for the right to rape Palestinians and turn off the water and bomb schools. And, they're talking about resettling the Gaza Strip, of course. Meanwhile, how, if there is a war, and we've been talking about this for months, but if there is an escalation of this regional war and Israel decides to reinvade South Lebanon, or, start bombing Iran, how do they expect it to go for Israel, for its, not just its military, which is already attrited, but the society in general, who are, many we've seen this week, people scrambling to try and leave Israel, people, posting, videos of themselves inside bunkers in Tel Aviv. What do they think is going to happen?
Good question. I'm not sure that Netanyahu had thought through that much. He was fairly eager last week for a quick victory. I think, let's kill Haniya while we can, and let's kill Fuad Shukr while we can. And that was probably, the extent of his ability to think at that time. Of course, if there is a major escalation of the kind you've referred to in the region, this is not just Israel versus the axis of resistance, because there are, in excess of 46,000 American military people stationed at bases throughout the whole of the Middle East. Now, I suppose a large number of those are in Qatar. Qatar plays the most complex role in all of this, because, as we know, they've been the hosts for Hamas leaders, and before that they were hosts for the Afghan Taliban, the leaders there, the people who were anti-US, fighting the US in Afghanistan. But they also host the largest military base in the Persian Gulf, the Al-Udeid base. So it's playing this very complicated role. And there are obviously a lot of American military in Syria, in Jordan, in Iraq, some in Saudi Arabia, a lot in the Emirates. And then there's the naval forces in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, in the Gulf of Aden, and so on. So, in the event of a major conflagration, all of these would be very, very much at risk. And they know that. They've seen what's happened in the Red Sea with the Houthis and the Houthi capabilities. I mean, the capabilities of, these very interesting, like, people from Yemen, which nobody had ever, like, a year ago thought would be a major factor in international politics. And suddenly, the Ansar Allah in Yemen, you have to take that into account, and shipping companies around the world are having to send their ships around the Cape of Good Hope. And like it's been had major impact on global supply chains. So I guess what I'm saying is, for a long time, I've thought that the Israelis would not escalate to a point that it threatens the American military positions around the region. But now I think they might be prepared to do that, just to stick it to Joe Biden. And of course, there's also been a really interesting poll came out this week that was a poll taken in this country by, I have to say, fairly conservative and pro-war organization called the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, something like that. And they found for the first time that a majority of American citizens do not want to have American troops sent to protect Israel. That is new. That is, part of the fallout from the resistance that we've seen from the people of Gaza and the people around the region, that Americans do not want to see our young men and women out there dying for Israel. That's significant.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you a quick question about Jordan, really related to what you're talking about, this potential regional conflagration, which, and I guess we could say is already starting, really. Iran's much anticipated response to the recent assassinations of Ismail Haniyeh and Fouad Shukr, the top Hizballah commander in Lebanon, is raising questions on how other actors in the region may position themselves. In April, of course, as you've already mentioned, Jordan helped Israel and the US to block Iranian projectiles fired towards Israel. Helena, how do you anticipate what Jordan will do, how they may position themselves in this situation? Does it have much of a choice given the 2021 agreement between Jordan and the US that provides the US military with unimpeded, that's the word that's used in the agreement, I'm told, unimpeded rent-free use of Jordanian facilities and free movement of US military personnel? What do you think?
I think in the event of this regional conflagration, if it happens, then Jordan would do exactly what we saw it do in April, which is, have the military cooperate with the Americans and Brits in protecting Israel and cooperate with Israel openly, which they've been doing, as we know, for many years. But the caveat is that in April, it didn't work. Enough of the Iranian, maybe 7 of the Iranian missiles got through, with their way having been cleared by the smaller missiles and drones that went through before. So Jordan, of course, is in a complicated situation. It was created as an independent state by the Brits, precisely to be a kind of Bantustan for Palestinians as they were being displaced by the Zionists. Obviously, as we know, Jordan has a majority of ethnic Palestinian citizens and large refugee camps. So they've always had, from King Hussein, through King Abdullah, they've had to tread a fine line and find a way to deal in some way with the Palestinian political reality, which they've done overwhelmingly by oppressing Palestinians in Jordan. And it's difficult for Palestinians to organize in Jordan. But I just want to come back to the global level. We are now, it's August the 7th. We're halfway between the anniversary of the US atomic bombing of Hiroshima, which was August 6th, and the US atomic bombing of Nagasaki, which was August 9th. And, those were very, very important moments in global history. I feel that we're at something like that right now. And, Israel has nuclear weapons, either ready to go, or you just like screw two parts together and then they're ready to go. I don't think its nuclear weapons are any use to it at all right now, honestly. They've always had a deterrent function, but they haven't deterred this current wave of resistance from around the region. And I think it's been my hope for a long time, but specifically over the last 10 months, that this era of US monopolization of Arab-Israeli diplomacy needs to come to an end. And I think the fact that the Russian National Security Chief, General Shoigu, in Tehran, consulting on military matters with his counterparts in Iran, but also offering to be a mediator between Iran and Israel. That is interesting. Russia as a mediator between Iran and Israel. So the world is changing. It's not changing nearly fast enough. But I just found that kind of a fascinating little thing. Of course, if we do go back to the time of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those were undertaken primarily as to warn the Russians not to come down the eastern part of the Asian landmass. But anyway, here we are again.
That's yeah. I think the entire world doesn't want anything to come near to that again. But we have to see. And Israel is the most belligerent liability for world peace, at this point, next to the US, of course. And yeah, I mean, it would be incredible. We just saw, you mentioned Russia trying to mediate. We just saw Beijing mediating the Palestinian Unity Declaration 2 days, I think it was 2 days before Haniyeh was assassinated. So yeah, it is incredibly significant that while the U.S. continues its tired old song of saber rattling and sending more weapons and threatening to send more U.S. troops and padding Israel's armories with even more weapons, other superpowers are doing the diplomacy thing, and we'll see. Hopefully, what happens. And meanwhile, the genocide in Gaza is ongoing. Well, we just have a few minutes left, but we wanted to talk about the book that you and Rami Khoury are putting together that, as you mentioned, is going to be out from OR Books in a few weeks. Tell us about the book, Understanding Hamas and Why It Matters, and why it's significant to put something like this together at this time, especially.
Thanks. Well, this was a decision that we made on the board of Just World Educational to initially launch a project that would be a series of webinars, which we did. We presented the 5 webinars in May, and they were actually very much more successful than we had dared to hope. We had 5 wonderful specialists, Dr. Paola Caridi, their names are all down at the bottom there, who's an Italian journalist and analyst who has spent time in the occupied territories and did a lot of interviewing of Hamas people, I want to say in the aughts and the early teens of the current century. And Jeroen Gunning, who's a Dutch researcher who's done a lot of interviewing, Khaled Haroub, who lives in Qatar, and I mean, all these people have deep expertise in the internal politics of Hamas, and Moain Rabbani, who was just, he was looking at so many aspects of the situation. Our last guest expert was this guy from London called Dr. Azam Tamimi, who is, he's a kind of a senior figure within the political firmament that gave birth to Hamas. And he's a real expert on Islamic political thought. And he has been close to many of the leaders of Hamas over the years. So it was really good to have him on and, answering the tough questions. And actually, Nora, since you're a board member of Just World Educational, you were in that last session. So the book is essentially the transcripts of our sessions. And we also put in the some basic documentation about Hamas, which people in the West are completely unfamiliar with. There's the people in the West know about the 1988 Hamas Charter and how scary that is. They don't know about the 2017 Hamas Declaration of Principles, which updates things considerably. They don't know about, all the reports into the 2006 parliamentary election in the West Bank and Gaza, and the fact that Hamas won the election, which was free and fair. So we present some of that documentation, and we want the book to be accessible to people who are not specialists in the affairs of West Asia. Just like community activists, church groups, anti-war activists worldwide throughout the Anglophone world. So we're really lucky that we're working with OR Books, because they do publish simultaneously in London and New York, and they can ship anywhere in the world. So, hopefully maybe Tamara can put our QR code up on the screen so that people can then take it or maybe not. Whatever.
They can go to the website for sure. It's right there. Yeah.
So the reason we did it is because, even amongst many people who are outspoken and really active in support of humanitarian aid for Gaza and sharing all these, horror stories and saying you've got to treat the people of Gaza as humans, but they don't want to talk about Hamas, because they have kind of, I won't say drunk the Kool-Aid, but I would say they've been unacceptably affected by all the anti-Hamas propaganda. And when Israeli or Zionists, propagandists say all Palestinians are Hamas, right. Therefore it's justified to kill them all. People don't know what Hamas is, what it has done in the past, what its roots are, the fact that it has taken decisions at certain points to launch violence against Israeli civilians. It has taken decisions at other points to stop that violence. And those are all determined by the offers that they have repeatedly made to the Israeli authorities. We will immunize your civilians. We will not attack your civilians if you stop attacking our civilians. Can we both have an agreement that we won't do that? And the Israelis have turned that down every single time. So, when Hamas decided to participate in the 2006 elections, the year before, they stopped all their military actions, both against Israel. Well, they've only ever taken military actions against Israel and against some Israeli collaborators. And they participated in good order in that election. And all the Palestinian factions, including Fatah and, Mahmoud Abbas, and the Israelis and the United States and the Europeans all said, let's have them in the process. And they entered the process. They won the election. And then Fatah and the Israelis and the US couldn't take that defeat and came down so hard against Hamas and enacted the siege that the people of Gaza have been living under. So, all of that history needs to be understood as a precursor to what happened on October 7th and as a guide to what we can do now in terms of negotiating with Hamas, which I have to underline, this government of Israel and our government here in the United States have been negotiating with Hamas since very early on over the release of the hostages and the detainees and a ceasefire. And, when it happened for 7 days back in November, it worked. And then that ceasefire fell apart. So, at the same time that they are negotiating with Hamas, they are still, the Israelis and the American authorities and the European authorities and all those people, demonizing Hamas. So, are they actually negotiating in good faith? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's incredibly important, and I'm very proud to be on the board of Just World Ed and helping to usher that book into the world. Again, you can go to either justworldeducational.org or the website for OR Books and pre-order a copy. And Helena, finally, give us just a rundown of the Palcast that you and our contributor Yusuf El-Jamal also put together that people can listen to.
Yeah, well, we had a really good recording session today. We're doing these Palcast podcasts once a week, and Yusuf El-Jamal is really in charge. He's in Istanbul, Turkey, and he brings on nearly all the guests. And then we also have Tony Groves, who's with us from Ireland. I love having his Irish brogue on there. And, so most of Yusuf's guests, most of our guests are Palestinians from Gaza. Last week, we had Ahmed Naouk, who was working with Rafah al-Arir on We Are Not Numbers. And Ahmed said something that just broke my heart, because he had, like so many of his family members were killed, I want to say in late October in a bombing in Gaza against their refugee camp. Maybe 21, however many members of his family just killed. And there he was in London. He said, sometimes I feel jealous of those are my family members who were killed because they have not had to live through the last 10 months of absolute agony that the rest of us have. And I don't know why. I mean, I'm not really, I am a sentimental person, but that really touched me to the quick when I heard him say that you feel jealous of people who've been killed.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I've heard that a couple times from people over the last 10 months, and it says so much. And the book again is called Understanding Hamas and Why That Matters. You have a copy of it there.
Whoops.
There we go. From OR Books, and check out the Palcast with Helena and Yusuf. Helena, as always, it's so good to have you. And
thank you, Helena.
Yeah, thanks for being with us.
Great to work with both of you and Tamara and Ellie behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you so much. And you are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with 𝐓𝐡𝐞, and let's bring Jon on. There he is. Hey, Jon.
Hey, guys.
Hey.
Good interview.
Yeah.
Great to see Helena.
Yeah, absolutely. All the time. There's so much that's happened in the last week, yet again. And then after the resistance report, we're going to have a couple issues to discuss. So let's get right into it. Go ahead.
Let's do it. All right. We're going to start, as always, in Rafah. And although there's a couple historical videos in this package, same as always, every video is from the last week. So the concentration of the Israeli operation right now is in Rafah. And if we look at the next map here, you can see the Philadelphia corridor, which I have been reporting on for months now, that this is Israel's primary objective, is this corridor. And this week, they really cemented the idea that they're going to keep the Philadelphia corridor indefinitely, and that that was manifested in, well, it was manifested in the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, the key negotiator for the prisoner exchange, which indicates that they're not, Israel doesn't care about their getting their prisoners back, doesn't care about a prisoner exchange. And so the Philadelphia corridor is in the documents to withdraw from in the prisoner exchange. And in Rome this week, during negotiations, the Mossad chief took a one-page memo from Netanyahu that said that the Philadelphia corridor is now being taken out of negotiations and will be held till some later date. And the IDF is looking for essentially a strategic gain out of these two corridors, the Netzarim corridor that runs through the center of the Gaza Strip, dividing the north from the south, and the Philadelphia corridor that runs between the border with Egypt and southern Gaza. And the Philadelphia corridor has this arms smuggling, all kinds of smuggling tunnels that Israel is attempting to cut off. And so part of this operation, the strategic operation for Israel, is to be able to keep these corridors and operate with freedom, freedom to operate like they do in Area A in the West Bank, using the military to attack whenever they want without political interference or consent, but to be able to have a free hand to operate with their death squads and carry out attacks against resistance fighters and leaders that they haven't been able to get at during this war, while they're destroying, as Helena said, water facilities, universities, hospitals, but not rooting out the resistance. And so their idea is that if they postpone the withdrawal from these corridors, these two key strategic corridors, that they'll be able to carry on with the war that they have not been winning, that they're clearly losing, and that I think is a growing consensus in the international community that this is not any kind of victory for Israel, despite the massive destruction and the genocide that we have been covering every day now for 306 days. And so the head of the IDF strategic division said this week that we're not giving back the Philadelphia corridor, the Philadelphia axis. The IDF is not saying it will be handed over to a foreign force. We will continue to operate there above and below ground. And that memo was brought to Rome to essentially torpedo the ceasefire negotiations. So that's from the Philadelphia corridor. And one thing just to keep in mind over these, while we look at these operations in Rafah, is just the range of operations that have been carried on. We're now 3 months into the operation in Rafah that was told would take a few weeks. Same as Khan Yunis, the operation just drags on because their objectives are not being met. They're saying they're rooting out tunnels on the border, but in the same case with all over Gaza, they're not going to the deep tunnels. They're still at the first tier of tunnels. And so the operation continues. 86% of the Gaza Strip is under evacuation orders, while the Israelis fight the resistance in Rafah. There was a bunch of operations yesterday that came out on video that missed the deadline. Qassam missed the day 306 deadline. So we'll dig into those more next week. But let's take a look at number one here, because we saw another 𝐄𝐥𝐿 anti-tank guided missile strike. This is the Chinese People's Liberation Army anti-tank guided missile that's of the same class as the Kornet wire-guided anti-tank missile, and we see it being used again. We saw it back in June, and I spent some time digging into that in June. And here we have it being used again. It looks by the same crew here. They're talking, and the fighter's saying, "I swear, O Netanyahu, I will turn your tanks to scrap with this weapon. Bring the tow trucks to collect the scraps." And so we can also see that, again, this weapon is being propped up on what looks like a Kornet tripod. Normally, this 𝐄𝐥𝐿 system is used for a fighter behind sandbags, like lying prone on the ground. And so Qassam has got it propped up on a Kornet tripod to get it up higher and fire it out of the window of this building. And as you can see, a clear sight. The spotter says 2 just exited the vehicle. That's what they're saying to each other. You can see that's actually that's a Namr recovery vehicle that's used as a tow truck. So they're actually attacking the tow truck in this case, but it also has an engineering crew in the back. You can see the wire guided launch there, and the spotter is actually telling him to lift it up, like up a bit. So the spotter is actually directly communicating for the targeting, which hits right in the middle of the crew cabin of the engineering unit's cabin, not the crew, the population of the tank, the infantry that are in this case, it's engineering infantry that are in the armored vehicle. And you can see direct hit again, as it was in June, perfect strike. So these guys are apparently 2 for 2 using this system. And you can see the spectacular destruction of the vehicle. Here comes the medevac again. The medevac is, again, it's within range of that weapon that we just saw being used, and it's not being used to target the medevacs, which is, again, something we're pointing out every single episode because we're seeing it every single episode. So that's the HJ8. You can see the system destroy that tank. Let's loop it one more time, Tamara. They destroy the tank, the Namr troop carrier. It has a penetration of 1,000 millimeters of folded armor, and so this is something like 50% greater penetration than the Yasin anti-tank missile, anti-tank rocket that we see Qassam using all the time. So they clearly have this system working. These 2 fighters appear to be the same fighters that were in it the first time. They're giving their message to Netanyahu that they're going to turn their vehicles into scraps. And these are presumably, like I said, they're Chinese weapons. These are presumably smuggled from Syria. They proliferated in Syria. It's possible they're also from Libya. After the fall of Gaddafi, his weapon stores were ransacked, and a number of those weapon systems made it into the Gaza Strip. So that's what we're seeing in this case here. We've seen anti-tank guided missiles be used in the north as well. We've seen Hornets and Concours anti-tank systems being used. We saw a Mylutka system used as well. So they do have anti-tank guided missile systems. You can see the spotter there with his rangefinder and binoculars. So direct hit on the side of the crew cabin of this tank and destroying it. Clearly, you could see the pieces of it flying up, which we don't see all that much because of the potency of this particular weapon. So it's a remarkable strike. 3 months into this operation, you can see that it's down near the Philadelphia corridor. That's what we're looking at there on the second row of fences that you see there is the Egyptian border fence. So direct hit on that. And you can go back and see the previous segment that I did of the first strike, because we saw in that segment that the fighters were holding a Rafah brigade anti-tank unit manual when they fired the first time. And so it looks like the same crew, it's the same weapon, and they're 2 for 2 with that one. Let's look at number 2 tomorrow, because this was in the video. This is never seen before footage. We saw this footage the first time, but we never saw this footage. This is the burning Namr engineering vehicle with the carpet thermobaric warhead or thermobaric demining missile system, rocket system on the back that's used for blowing up improvised explosive devices. And so Qassam put this footage into the second video that came out this week because we hadn't seen the actual burning of the vehicle. So that was interesting to see. So I wanted to bring you that one. Interesting operations happening in Rafah 3 months into this battle in Rafah, where the Israelis are saying they're fighting the final 4 battalions of the Qassam brigades, which we know is just patently absurd. Although there are 4 battalions in Rafah operating well. Let's look at number 3 here, because we see a soldier here climbing on the roof of his Merkava tank. He's coming out the hatch here. Unclear what he's doing. But this is a sign dated August 3rd that says, "We offer our leaders before our soldiers." And the sniper looks at us and says, "This is for Hania," which is going to be a theme of this week's videos and operations. All the fighters, really all over the region, were saluting Hania this week, as they always do. And so once again, we have to edit out these clips to make them PG, but you can see the soldier looking at his buddy down in the hatch, and the Israelis were forced to admit that a soldier in the 401st Armored Brigade was critically injured amid fighting in the southern Gaza Strip yesterday. They announced that on the 4th, the soldier was wounded in a Hamas-claimed sniper attack. So that's what you're seeing right there. And look at number 4. There's another Al-Ghul sniper operation. And interestingly, that this is a long-distance operation. And I believe this is the first time you're going to see here. This is the first generation of the Al-Ghul sniper rifle. It's a 14.5 millimeter, so it's larger than the 12.7, which is a significant difference. It's like a 50% upgrade in the energy, and it's larger. And that is a hit. And someone did the calculation. Maybe we can loop it again tomorrow. We can see the fighter. You can see the weapon. You can see the spotter with a rangefinder as well beside him on this. So yeah, the version 1 of the Al-Ghul, you can see the fighter with the binoculars and the rangefinders on the table beside them. So the first time that we've noticed, I've noticed them using this first generation of the Al-Ghul rifle, and calculating someone, a military, a weapons guy, calculated the speed and the time, and calculated that to be a 1,700 meter sniper operation, which is remarkable. The world record sniper operation for NATO is like 2,200 meters. So you're talking extreme distances here, and that kind of distance is obviously well within range of all those helicopters that we see. So that was the first version of the Al-Ghul, and I brought this video here, number 5, from 2014. This is the video when Qassam launched the Al-Ghul rifle for the first time. This dropped in the middle of the 2014 war, the 50-day war. This dropped right in the middle of it. Qassam released this and showed it being used. And here you get a sense of the size of the weapon here with the fighter. And in this video, there's multiple shots at Israeli soldiers, but there was not enough film to bring it to you because of the censorship. So, but this is interesting because it's the first time, 10 years ago, first time that they showed this video. So I wanted to bring you that to see it for the first time. So first generation Al-Ghuls being used in Rafah. And as well, we're seeing number 6 here, we're seeing rocket artillery being used. This is the Rajum system. And the sign says, "For the soul of our martyr leader, Ismail Hania." It's dated August 2nd. So these are coming out the day that they're filming these. This is the Rajum system, multiple rocket system. This is one of 15,000 rockets that the Qassam, that have been fired from Gaza, primarily by Qassam, but also, as we know, by all the factions, are still able to fire rockets. They fired rockets yesterday. There was multiple barrages of rockets yesterday. I don't bring these videos for the most part because there's so many others that we don't show the mortars and rocket operations, but this week I mixed in a few just so you can see that these are still ongoing, because this is what Israel says that they're stopping. And this is the kind of operation. This is targeted at the IDF base across the border from Rafah. So they're firing on the Israeli military mustering on the other side of the border before they enter to invade Rafah. And so this is Qassam built 114 millimeter rocket artillery, the Rajum system. This was the system that was used on October 7th to create cover for the paragliders and for the breaching and blinding operation that busted through the border in the prison break. So it's a critical system that we're seeing, and that looked like it was a makeshift. That looked like it had been built during this war. That's not what the original system looks like. And so it's possible that they're manufacturing, because the systems get hit. These rockets are dangerous operations. They often get hit. So they're being able to manufacture. And if you look, you can see it sort of looks like it's strung together. So they have the capacity to rebuild these systems and put them together now, entering month 11, to be able to operate this way. We've seen some clues that they're still developing. They still have weapons capacity development happening throughout the war, but that's going to be something that we obviously keep our eyes on to see how that goes, because there's no doubt that the war is costly, that cutting off the border with Rafah and Egypt is costly for smuggling of weapons. But we know that the unexploded ordnance that's being rained down on Gaza is being reappropriated and used for further weapons. So let's look at number 7 tomorrow, because again, these are all different operations that I'm showing you, all different types of operations. This is another booby trap operation using a backup camera from a car that we have seen being used throughout this war. This is a tunnel entrance. Again, we're talking about the Philadelphia corridor here. These are the tunnels that are going down and across the border. And we have, on last week's show, I dug into these operations in Rafah, because the Israeli military has been saying that there's more of these booby traps in Rafah than in anywhere else that they've been fighting in Gaza in the last 10 months. The commanders are said there's many-fold more, not just more, but many-fold more, many times more than in other places, which might be explained by the length of time that it took for the battle in Rafah to begin. But it's also related to what you're seeing here, which is that the Israelis are working on this border region, destroying along the Philadelphia corridor, which is a lot of these tunnels. So Qassam has the ability to predict where the Israelis are coming, because they're carrying out this very pronounced operation along the Philadelphia corridor. And because of that, they're able to prepare and booby trap these buildings in Rafah. So, and then number 8's a little bit more what we're used to. Fighter popping out of a tunnel here 3 months on with his Yasin 105, saying, he says to the camera, this is revenge for the blood of Hania, as he pops out and aims here at a Namr troop carrier. We see the we see its trophy active protection system deploying here. It's not totally clear that it defeats the incoming round. You can see it on the right-hand side. That's the trophy system. And something's firing on the left-hand side, opposite for the screen. And this is a second tunnel operation through a different tunnel, another Yasin 105 strike against a Namr armored personnel carrier, an APC. And so these tunnels they're able to communicate. And again, we're seeing medevacs well within range, landing. And yeah, another operation for Hania. And we're seeing here the D9 Caterpillar bulldozer made in the US tugging the Namr troop carrier behind it there in Rafah. And those operations are what we're used to, and they are still going on apace. And then number 9 tomorrow here, we have a commander. This led the video with the tunnel operation. And this is a commander here directly addressing the 4 battalions in Rafah that the Israelis say that they're trying to target. He says, we say to Netanyahu, who claims to have eliminated the 4 brigades in the Rafah battalion, the 4 battalions in the Rafah brigade, and searches for absolute victory in the city, that we're dragging your forces on all combat fronts by the 4 brigades. We continue to prepare plans and select targets with great care, and the victory you seek is an illusion. And then he goes through operations that we've seen that I've been showing you over the last 3 months, that have carried out in Rafah. And he shows that each of the battalions carrying out these operations that we're familiar with. So he says, he's going to say here that let us remind you of the tank massacre, which we saw there when he blew off the multiple tank massacres there that was carried out by the Eastern Battalion. And then he talks about the ambushes of death in Yibna and Shabara and Al-Shabara camps, where the battalions meticulously prepared The fighters meticulously prepared by rigging buildings, luring soldiers in, and detonating them in the tunnels. And then here he's going to talk about the Western battalion using guerrilla action devices. Here we can see them running up. We remember that scene where they hand delivered 2 guerrilla action devices into the turret gap of a Merkava tank. And then he says here that we're going to use the red arrow system. This is the June video that you're seeing here. And then that's the never seen before footage that I showed you after that first strike. So the commanders still operating, command and control still intact. And that's what they're doing by showing videos like this. They're showing command and control. They're showing that they're listening, that they're able to communicate immediately. The day that things happen, the videos are coming. There's no interference in their communications, in getting the videos delivered. And they're able to operate. Those 4 battalions in Rafah are still able to battle 3 months on, just like they were in Khan Yunis, just like they were in Jabalia, just like they were in Gaza City. This is the story throughout Gaza. So we're going to move to the north here and take a look at Gaza City. If we look at map C here tomorrow, if we have that one, the zoom in on the north, you can see the Netzarim corridor. So the Netzarim corridor and the Philadelphia corridor are these 2 strategic corridors that the Israeli military is intending to hold to operate for the coming years, multiple years they talk about operating in Gaza. And the idea, as I said earlier, is to get to have freedom of operation for their death squads to operate inside Gaza in the center of the territory, move through the territory and attack. Tel El-Hawa, we've been talking about, it's been the target of that, and they're attacking Tel El-Hawa from the Netzarim corridor. When they attacked Shujaiya, they came from 2 axes, but one of them was Netzarim corridor to attack Shujaiya in the east. And just to take a look at Shujaiya, while we see that they're in the middle of the map, they're east of Gaza City, we're going to talk about that, the placement of Shujaiya and the cross-border raid in 2014. So keep in your mind, in your mind's eye, where Shujaiya is for that operation. But let's go to number 10 tomorrow, because these are 2 operations by Sarai al-Quds in Tel El-Hawa, and the fighter, the fighter says, we will inflict pain on our enemy, and after this, he says, more is coming. So Sarai al-Quds, Islamic Jihad, is showing us them moving through Tel El-Hawa, and you can see just total destruction. But keep an eye on this one. They're using a Tandem 85, which is Sarai al-Quds' primary anti-tank weapon. And look at him thread the needle through the uprights of those buildings in Tel El-Hawa. It's a remarkable shot that these fighters are getting better and better as this war goes on. They're skilled fighters that are getting better and better. And that is the case. This is an entire generation of fighters that are learning how to operate in an urban environment, and that are taking these skills and knowledge back to their bases safely. They're not carrying out martyrdom missions, intentionally carrying out martyrdom missions. They're coming back, returning to their bases safely, and sharing the information that they have gleaned through this 10-month battle. And this is something that Israel is going to have to deal with for the generations to come. They have children that have witnessed the genocide for 10 months and ongoing. Everything that's happened to their families. They haven't been in school for this entire year. Obviously, there's a lot of makeshift schools, heroic makeshift schools in tents, trying to carry on. But they've missed a year of school, and they've watched these fighters in their eyes defend their homeland in heroic ways. That's going to inspire an entire generation of fighters. So you have a generation of skilled fighters, and you have a generation coming up underneath them that are going to be dedicated to the struggle. And that's something that Israel is going to be reckoning with for however long it lasts. I won't do any predictions on that. So number 11 is also Sarai al-Quds. This is their Thunder shock device. It's an explosively formed penetrator. You can see the fighter hiding under the staircase here, one of the safest places to hide, as they detonate that fierce explosive against an armored vehicle right outside. And so, and the fighter says in this one that they cut the vehicle up, and he could hear them screaming. And so under the stairs there is a safe place to be. It has the structure to protect you. The archways of the stairs are protective in that case. So you can see how close he is to that operation. So Țărai al-Quds also still operating in the same way that they have been all throughout the war. We don't see any signs of destruction or dismantling of any of their battalions either. So 11B, this is Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. And this is a fighter with 107 millimeter rocket artillery, and he's doing the same thing. He's saying this is in response to the massacre of civilians, to the assassination of Hania, and to the assassination of our brothers in Hizballah, Fuad Shukr. And then they're carrying out these rocket artillery operations targeting 𝐄𝐿 and 𝐄𝐿 site is on the opposite border of Shujaiya that I showed you on that map just previously. So just wanted to mix in some other groups there. Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades are Fatah adjacent, let's call them, in the Gaza Strip. So number 12 here is a piece of history that I'm bringing you. This is the 2014 𝐄𝐿 tunnel operation. One of 6 cross-border raids during the 2014 war. This is a video put out by Qassam. And last week, Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Tehran along with his bodyguard, Wissam Abu Shaban. And there's media reporting that Wissam was part of this operation, this 𝐄𝐿 operation. This was an operation. Qassam hasn't acknowledged that yet. It's widely published in the media, but Qassam has not said anything about whether that's true or not. But this operation, in any case, was 10 years ago, a few days ago. It was the 10th anniversary of this operation. And this is really the seeds of this war that you're seeing, we've seen for the last 10 months, is this operation. You're seeing a Nukba force here coming out in a tunnel and attacking an Israeli base in 𝐄𝐿, and you can see that the professionalism of these Nukba forces. They're spread out from each other. They're not clustered. They're not clustered in a gaggle like we always see the Israeli soldiers. They're spread out, moving towards their objectives. You can also see the early Yasin there in his hand. And then these fighters also, I had to edit out the audio of this and the gunfire of this because they're always trying to take this video down as soon as it's posted. The Israelis in 2014 said that this didn't happen, and then the night after, Qassam released this video. And there's a remarkable documentary done by Al Jazeera called Group Number 9. Al Jazeera Arabic. It talks about the 9 fighters, and they're in the tunnel with them. And the fighters tell the story about being in the tunnel, and they say they came out of the tunnel 3 times in reconnaissance operations, and went back in the tunnel. And the unit that was waiting in the tunnel, they're coming up here around the gate to enter the base here, and you can see they still haven't been spotted by the Israelis inside. They're going to bust open this gate. We're missing the sound of gunfire here. They're firing on the pillbox. Is what those kind of bases are called in military slang. But look at how separated the fighters are. So a single airstrike or an anti-tank weapon like the Israelis use can't be used against them, and to kill multiple fighters in the group. So they're storming this pillbox. They're inside. I also had to cut out the part where the soldier right here is holding on to their legs, begging and screaming. And that screaming is something that is well known in Gaza, because this footage was a sensation in Gaza. It's a remarkable operation, and that's a captured Israeli bullpup Tavor X95 gun. Rifle. They didn't capture a soldier. They killed at least 5. The Israelis admitted to 5 being killed, and then all of the Qassam fighters here are returning to the base safely through the tunnel. They knew they had 10 minutes of air cover, and the documentary, the Al Jazeera documentary, is just it's an unbelievable documentary. Can we loop it one more time tomorrow just so we get every part of this? The Al Jazeera doc's remarkable because it talks to the fighters, the actual fighters who executed the mission, and they talked about being in the tunnel for 17 days. And the commander says that the hardest part was telling the first unit that was in the tunnel for 17 days that they would be replaced at the last moment by fresh Nukba fighters. And the fighters that were being replaced argued ferociously. Many of them argued ferociously and refused to leave the tunnel. They wanted to carry out the operation so badly that they were begging and crying to carry out the operation. And in the documentary, Jafar is the main character of the fighters in the documentary, and he talks about how brutal that moment was to see how bad his comrades wanted to carry out this operation. It's the exact opposite of what happens when they attack the pillbox inside. The Israelis run away, and some of them freeze. The fighters talk about 5 of the Israelis freeze. One of them dives down and grabs the leg and holds on to the boot of one of the Qassam fighters and is screaming and begging for the opposite reason than the Qassam fighter was crying about wanting to carry out the operation. So the fighters in this documentary, group number 9, it's called, it was on Black Box, Al Jazeera Arabic. It's floating around. Wael Dahdouh did the work on that, and they're down in the tunnel, talking about how the tunnel took years to dig. And you're watching an operation here that's less than 5 minutes long from beginning to end of the operation. And so the commitment to that fight is just really a potent message from 2014 that we still see constantly now in this war. 10 years on, 10 years of building capacity for the Nukba forces. We can see the roots of that are in that operation. So just remarkable. And again, there was 6 cross-border operations during the 2014 war. In Israel believed that there was 32 cross-border tunnels that they tried to come out. And that's the beginning of the iron wall that they built, the multi-billion-dollar fence that they built around Gaza that they believed had sealed Gaza off for good. That the Qassam brigades dismantled, the same Nukba forces dismantled on October the 7th. So that is the resistance report from Gaza, but I'm going to take a quick look at the other fronts here because obviously Lebanon has been in the news consistently, particularly since the assassination of 𝐓𝐡 𝐄𝐥𝐞, who is by all accounts, including Nasrallah's, the top commander of Hizballah. And this is the first time we've seen him. We don't see these commanders until they're killed. And you can see the faces blurred out of the next group that haven't been killed. And you can see this is the first footage we've ever seen. This is from Hizballah, this footage of them battling. 𝐓𝐡 𝐄𝐥𝐞 was a founding commander. He was involved in Islamic Jihad, the pre-Hizballah formation that was famous for targeting the Israeli military base in Tyre and Sur in South Lebanon in 1981, I believe that one was. In 1983, in 1982 and 83, they wiped out the CIA station. They took out the Marine barracks in Beirut. You can see him there with Nasrallah. You can see him down there in Hezbollah's tunnel system. You can see him speaking to his fighters. And Nasrallah talked about him twice this week in speeches and said that he was always the commander. He was the founding commander, that he was always involved in the most important operations. They put Nasrallah put him in the same category as Imad Mughniya and Mustafa Badruddin, who are the two previous commanders that people knew almost nothing about until they were assassinated. And then this is showing us here, Nasrallah credits 𝐄𝐥𝐞 for the long-range and precision missile-guided systems, rocket artillery, and missile systems that are what are threatened on Israel. Israel expects, according to their intelligence estimates, that 3,000 rockets a day is how the war would start with Hezbollah, 3,000 rockets a day with an arsenal of more than 150,000 rockets and precision-guided munitions that can hit all over Israel with precision. So that was interesting. Just that's the first ever video that we've seen of 𝐓𝐡 𝐄𝐥𝐞. So I wanted to just show you that. And also this week, number 20, Hezbollah released their 300 Days mixtape, which they do. I don't know if we have volume in this one, but it's the volume is a part of these. You can hear it a little bit. In any case, it's part of the production value of these Hezbollah videos. You can see the days counting in the bottom right-hand corner and various different attacks that have been carried out over that time. 2,500 operations have been carried out. And then there's a voiceover on this that has Fouad Shukra saying to his men, man your posts and be at the ready, essentially. Remain at your base, stay in your military uniform, and keep your weapons in your hand. And then it's Nasrallah saying his famous line, between us and you are the battlefields, the nights, and the days, which is the threat. When will they respond? That's Nasrallah's response to that. So we're seeing here in these operations, part of the litany of operations. I'll just give you some of them. 1,050 settlement units targeted, 180 command and control posts, 450 technical equipment. That's when they blow up the Iron Dome radars, and these radars that you're seeing, those are anti-drone operations. They said 160 air defense operations, targeting 125 military vehicles. That's mostly armored vehicles, tanks, troop carriers, a lot of Jeeps. We've seen a number of Jeeps. There's been attacks on 61 artillery posts, 12 Iron Dome systems. They've downed 6 drones, 3 Hermes 900, 3 Hermes 450s in the 300 days. So Hezbollah has been busy this week with the psychological operations, and then that's the red for revenge that they were putting up. We've seen the red flag be flown in Tehran, and Nasrallah gave the speeches this week for Shukra with this red background that's being interpreted as that the response is coming. And Nasrallah said that there will be a response, and it's coming. So also this week, Hezbollah released these videos. This is a Burkan heavy rocket fired here. That you can see this is from a week and a half ago. This is one of 1,000 rocket operations that have fired more than 7,500 rockets, according to the IDF. There's also been, we're going to see here coming up, an anti-tank guided missile strike from their Tufan missile system, they call. This is a reverse engineered of the U.S. TOW anti-tank guided missile system. So multiple reverse engineered systems that Hezbollah has been using to great effect during this war. So this is one of 750 anti-tank guided missile operations that have been carried out against these settlement positions that are abandoned. There's more than 40 abandoned settlements in the north that have been abandoned by the Israelis. They just announced this week that there's not going back to school in northern Israel in the fall. This is the TOW system that I was talking about that you can see being used there. That's the reverse engineered, Iran reverse engineered the U.S. TOW system. The Hezbollah calls it the Tufan system. So we've been seeing this all week. And again, Nasrallah in his speech this week pointed out that there's chemical factories worth $31 billion, technology factories worth $76 billion, power plants worth $9 billion, food factories worth $12 billion. And he said, Nasrallah said, these factories took 34 years to build and can be destroyed in half an hour. And Hezbollah has been striking deeper inside of Israel in response to the assassinations of their fighters on the ground. But Nasrallah has said these are not the response for Fouad Shukra, and that when the response for Shukra happens, we will all know it. And these are not those operations. So number 22 here is Ansar Allah doing their thing, downing another MQ-9 Reaper drone, $35+ million drone downed over Sada Governorate in Yemen just a couple days ago. And this is the 10th Reaper, U.S. Reaper drone, United States Air Force MQ-9 Reaper drone downed by the Yemenis since 2017. and the 10th since 2017, and the 7th since the battle in the Red Sea began in solidarity with Gaza. We'll remember back in May, they got 3 in 3 weeks, and you can see the missile system is still intact on this one. And if we remember the previous one we showed, I showed you on the show, it looked like the Reaper drone was downed maybe by electronic warfare, because it wasn't blown up. It was only it was a crash landing. Electronic warfare jamming is the suspect for that one. Yemeni armed forces using electronic warfare to bring that down. In any case, they have all the pieces, articulated pieces of the MQ-9 Reaper drone, which will surely end up in Iran. And you can see there the missile systems, the Hellfire missiles, and the JDAM kits on a 500-pound bomb. And those are going to end up in Iran and be reverse engineered. And when we're reporting on the next war, I'll tell you about that in the same way that I talked about the Al-Mas anti-tank guided missile system that came from the Hezbollah capturing the Spike system in South Lebanon during the July war in 2006. So these Yemenis are standing on this, and the dialogue is essentially them standing on this, saying that the pride of U.S. manufacturing is under our feet. And as you can see, they're celebrating this. Previously, a couple of the drones they burned, but they've stopped doing that. They're now holding them, collecting them, and they know the value of them. We speculated about what kind of missile this is. We believe that these are being taken down by a Yemeni-built, Iranian engineered 358 missile. I've talked about that on previous shows, but Hezbollah cuts out just before they down the Hermes drones, which is a similar class to this MQ-9 Reaper. And we've seen the missile fired from the ground, but it was dark in the previous Yemeni downings of these drones. But it looked like the consensus seems to be that these are 358, item 358. These were missiles that were have been interdicted before, and parts were found of them. And this is the missile system that the Israelis have been worried about, because they knew that this system could hit their Hermes drones. So yeah, so the speaker says this plane was downed by the air defenses today of the Yemeni armed forces in the skies of the Sadr government while it was engaged in espionage activities. And also this week, Ansarullah commander Sayed Abdulmalik al-Badruddin al-Houthi delivered a speech almost immediately over the martyrdom of Ismail Haniyeh and Fuad Shukr. So, and sent millions of people into the streets on the Friday after that assassination as a response to that the Yemenis have been doing every Friday, but there was a massive demonstration last Friday. So the resistance axis powers are on side, understanding that this is a group battle. And as Nasrallah said, they might respond on their own. Iran might respond on their own. Or it might be all of the resistance axis fronts, the 7 fronts might respond all at the same time. And the psychological warfare of waiting for that is part of the cost, as Nora said, that Nasrallah said. And so the psychological operations are deep. A lot of people in Israel in the north, it's basically a ghost town. People are in their shelters, and there's panic in Israel. And the response, as Helena said, is almost certain to be larger than what we saw the first time when Iran struck, which was kind of a demonstrative test of Israel's air defenses. The Americans are trying to get them to make this one a demonstrative one as well, and rather than a painful one. But we'll see what the response is, because everybody has promised, Iran and Hezbollah has promised, there will be a response for this. So the clock is ticking on that. And that is the resistance report for this week, day 306 of the genocide. The fighting and the fighters are still in their bases, as they were on the first day, confronting the Israelis wherever they are.
Thanks so much, Jon. Take a breath there. Yeah, I mean, so you said 10 of those MQ-9 Reaper drones have been down since 2017, 7 since the last 10 months, right?
That's right. And
Amazing.
3 in May alone. May was the drone massacre month.
Wow.
So yeah,
reuse, recycle, that old adage.
Yeah, and it's being able to reverse engineer these weapon systems is a big deal. It's a significant part of the development of the resistance axis weaponry, and it's generational, right? Once you've reverse engineered that system, the system exists and you can improve upon it, and it's forever yours once you manufacture it, and that's what Iran has done.
Yeah.
So
incredible. Well, there's a lot to discuss. I wanted to we talked a little bit about Yahya Sinwar's appointment as the head of the political bureau of Hamas earlier in the program with Helena, but Jon, you were in Gaza in 2006. You've done extensive study of the political party and the apparatus and the bureaucratic structure of Hamas. And also specifically Yahya Sinwar's history. I know a lot of people, including myself, are curious to hear your analysis of Sinwar's appointment in Hania's footsteps.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. He was always the leader anyway. His deal for Hania to move abroad and become the overall leader of the political bureau was done in coordination with Sinwar. Sinwar's won twice to lead as the head of Gaza. We remember Saha Aruri was assassinated. He's the West Bank leader. And so there really wasn't any way for I believe this is a temporary move. We'll see. This is in the middle of a war. They're not able to convene the Shura Council in exile. There's an exile council, there's a West Bank council, there's a Gaza council. And so all of those components, and as Helena said, they're interwoven and they involve many organizations, groups, and are represented by people that we don't know. But one way to change the leadership is through a consensus vote. And that's what they did. They did it secretly. They did it in Gaza. They obviously got the message out of Gaza. And they put Sinwar in charge, which he always was anyway. Hania was executing the plans and the negotiations that Sinwar was leading. So to make him just in the time of war, to make him the de facto leader of both Gaza and overall Hamas, I think it just makes sense. Sinwar has a long history of struggle. He was a founding member of the Qassam brigades. He's actually a founding member of the pre-Qassam brigades, the Majid, which was an internal security service that was kind of like Palestinians attempting to have like a Shabak that would route out collaborators. That was a counterintelligence organization. And that was what his primary goal was to route out collaborators, because at that time in the 1980s, that was the most dangerous element. The Israelis were inside Gaza at that time. The occupation was inside Gaza, and collaborators were who was leading to the deaths of these commanders and leaders, who was outing the party's operations and Qassam's operations. And so that needed to be targeted. And Sinwar was the person who was in charge of that. So the trajectory of him being in charge of that through to today, where Israel is unable to get meaningful intelligence off the ground in Gaza. We see these guys on videos, Qassam fighters on phones, talking in tunnels, saying, go over here, go over, just like hanging out, talking on a phone line. And the Israelis can't touch that line. They've tried to touch it for a decade. Their operations have been thwarted. And now in this war, we see what happens when you tighten up and crack down on the collaborators. There's not a collaborator culture in Gaza at all now, and the Israelis are not able to operate. And the reason why Qassam will win this war is essentially a major part of it is because it's linked to that counterintelligence operation and ethos that is what Sinwar brought to the organization. That was his principal primary objective, even before the Qassam brigades were founded formally.
Yeah, I mean, it was very clear to me on the 7th of October last year that it could not have been successful without the previous few years of the collaborator network being rooted out of Gaza by Hamas.
Yeah, they had no idea, right? And they were able, because there was no collaborator element, they were able to actually have decoys and to send false messages into the channels, so that the Israelis believed they were hearing messages of that that Hamas, that Qassam was worried about the economy and we're not worried about operations. And we know that the exiled leadership, the Hania, had no idea about October 7th. So when we're talking about his significance on the ground in Gaza, he had no idea about October 7th. There's footage of him finding out as it's happening. He's in his office as it's happening. And so the leadership of Qassam, of Hamas, is in Gaza. But the way the Shura Council is structured is that the leader is supposed to be somebody from outside Gaza, somebody who isn't under the foot of the of the Israelis to be attacked and to be limited in their ability. And so the overall leader is effectively a diplomat. Hania was a diplomat. He was an excellent politician. He was never a military man. He was a politician in Gaza. He grew up with the guys. They all grew up together in the camps, like Helena said. That's absolutely right. They all grew up together in the camps. And Hania was a political person. And so when Hania took the overall lead in exile, he left Gaza to take over that position. And his job was to communicate with the allies. And that's ultimately what leads to him being the negotiator in the prisoner exchange. So that formation was Sinwar at the head, right? Sinwar's at the head, and he's sending his man to run the diplomatic operations overseas. You kill his man, and instead of having somebody who's disconnected from the connections to Gaza, nobody can leave Gaza right now. So on an ad hoc temporary basis, the Shura Council decided in, I think, very rational decision to just make Sinwar the overall head. He's leading the operation anyway. And so, yeah, it's pretty clear Israel doesn't want its people back. They assassinated the person who's negotiating. But that won't change the negotiating position of Qassam. We know that from many prisoner exchange negotiations of the past. They don't change their position. It's Israel that's changing the goalposts constantly to avoid a settlement. So Sinwar being in control, taking over, being the overall leader rather than just the leader in Gaza, was always the case anyway. And when Sinwar was elected to the head of Gaza, that moment in 2017 was really the moment when the Qassam brigades and the Hamas movement merged. He's the bridge between the Hamas movement and the Qassam brigades. He's a Qassam man. He's a fighter. He's at the helm of the Palestinian national movement right now, and he's a fighter. And that, I think, for Palestinians, I think you'll see in the coming days, but I think we've already seen there's mass support for that decision. And if there was an election, that's how the election would turn out too. The Qassam brigades are very, very popular across all political affiliations in Gaza. They're almost uniformly popular. And so to have a man like Sinwar, who's, he was the leader in prison, which is the most respected element of Palestinian resistance society. So to be the leader inside the prison, to come outside prison in the Shalit prisoner exchange. And
in
then
2011,
in 2011, spent a couple of years interacting between Qassam and the political bureau, because he went right away into the political bureau, not at the top of it. Because there's elections every 5 years, there's elections. So before he could run in the first election, he was already the bridge in that movement. And he's tried many different ways. He tried peaceful, he tried economic development, he tried multiple ways he tried reconciliation with Fatah. That was also something that's important. So now he's the leader of Hamas is the person who is the advocate for reconciliation between the factions. So I think it's a good thing and it's a straightforward, simple, and I don't think there could have been anyone else to do it. So I think, and that's why you get a unanimous vote.
Yeah, it's a message. It's a message to Israel and the West that they're not going to back down, they're not going to give up, and they're going to carry on with the resistance, the man on the ground.
And like Helena said, they try, this has been a practice of theirs for so long, and we see this in other Western settler colonies too, where they think that if you take out the heads of resistance groups and you try and turn the people against them, that it will somehow achieve the goals of the colony, and that just keeps not working. But they do not learn. So
they're big losses, though. Hania is a big loss. Fuad Shukra is a big loss. Nasrallah admitted that. He's the top commander. He's one of the 3 most important Hezbollah commanders over the last 40 years. But that doesn't change the trajectory of the organization. It actually hardens people to their determination to continue on the trajectory.
Right.
But it also...
Yeah, it was a really good point you made in that Hezbollah video, John, about how Fuad Shukr's face, we're seeing it for the first time, but then in the video you see the blurred out faces of the next commanders in line, and it was exactly the same with Imad.
So he would have been in those videos we saw of Imad Mughniya, who nobody had even knew what his face looked like. People in Hezbollah didn't know. He was the overall commander of Hezbollah for 30 years, and people in the organization didn't know. When he was killed and they showed his face, people in the organization were saying like, oh, I thought his name, because he's traveling on different names. And the operational security of Hezbollah is the model that Sinwar started to implement in the Gaza Strip, because you cannot have collaborators in the middle of your movement. It's impossible. And Hezbollah learned that from the Palestinians, from the bitter experiences of the Palestinians being infiltrated in Lebanon. Hezbollah learned from Islamic Jihad, their predecessor, that you have to root that out or you will not be successful. It's the number one priority for these groups, and Hezbollah did it, and they implemented it, and the Palestinians learned from Hezbollah, like Hezbollah learned from the Palestinians, in a give and take that has made both of the groups better.
Thanks so much for that. There's obviously this, we're going to have a lot more to update next week as things move along. But but we've been getting some questions. I know you've been getting a lot of questions on a recent report that CNN put out a couple days ago. It was, kind of surprisingly decent. The report says that Hamas is reorganizing and regenerating its ranks, despite what Israel's been claiming. Of course, the Israeli army rejected CNN's findings. The army told the Times of Israel, quote, "From the intelligence and findings on the ground, most of the Hamas brigades have been dismantled. It is estimated that most of the battalions are at a low level of competency and can no longer function as a military framework." Completely belying what we just saw in your resistance report and all the weeks prior. John, what do you make of CNN's report, and does it tell us anything new, i.e. anything that you haven't been saying already?
Anything that our audience hasn't heard? No, this doesn't bring anything, but it's interesting because they're using, they call it forensic. We haven't done that. We maybe should start calling it the forensic resistance report.
Let's do it.
But no, they're using primarily Israeli sources. So for Israel to say this is not true when the bulk of the sources for this are the Israeli military, that's where they're getting their information. This is the Institute for the Study of War and the American Enterprise Institute Critical Threats Project. So these are right-wing think tanks, pro-Israel think tanks, giving this data. They weren't crunching the Hamas, the Qassam and Al-Aqsa's data. They're talking about the data, and they do daily reporting. That it is one of the people that are doing it sort of on a parallel track to what I'm doing. tracking it every day and building a log. That's the underpinning of the work that I do, is that log. And their log is what they shared with CNN. And so the CNN is able to sort of say, like, these battalions are not wiped out based on, you can tell they're not wiped out for the same reason I say, is that when they go back to Tel 𝐿, you see structured military operations immediately being carried out. When they went into Khan Yunis, it was the same thing. When they went into Shujaiya for the second time, it was legendary, with the guys on the swing being like, we're waiting to come in and destroy your tanks. When they reinvaded Jabalia camp, remember, and they captured a soldier. Where's that soldier? Nobody's admitted to that. The Israelis just pretend like that we didn't see that soldier get dragged down the tunnel in Jabalia. So these battalions are able to reform. They're also not strict numbers. It's not like there's 100. It's not like there's 1,000. A battalion is 1,000 roughly, but that's not all it is. Some of them are 1,600. Some of them are 1,900. Some of them are 800. Some of them have special forces detachments, Nukba forces. You can't just say you killed X number and therefore that battalion is combat ineffective. And calling it combat ineffective means you can't carry out your missions. And I'm still, week after week, showing 45 minutes of videos of them carrying out their operations. And they show us on video that they planned where this operation was going to come. And I give you detail on that. That is all showing you that they are combat effective. And so this kind of game that Israel's playing, where they're saying, like, we've wiped out the battalions, and now they're trying to play counting games where you, like, they have cards and they cross off the names of people they killed. They cross off the battalions that they made combat ineffective. But the battalions can reform. They reform because they're a military structure that's able to replace their cadre. They have people just like Hizballah who step in when someone is taken out. But the CNN report still has a lot that I would have disagreed with. They take the Israeli numbers as gospel. They admitted that they just included Mohammed al-Deif as assassinated, and also Marwan Issa, the two top commanders of Qassam, which we don't have any evidence at all that they've been assassinated. They just added it into the story like they are. There's no evidence of that. That is something that Israel is telling us. And for the same reason we were talking about Sinwar, they don't have intelligence on the ground. They don't have assets feeding them information. So they actually have no idea if Dave and Issa are alive. They have no way to check it out, because they don't do battle damage assessment and go into these buildings and do forensics and see if they did raid Shifa Hospital looking for Marwan Issa's body and created a mass grave and dismantled the hospital, but there's no evidence for those commanders being killed, just like there's no evidence of the battalions being dismantled, because all information that we have, like in Rafah, for example, that commander that I showed in the video, he was saying this was an operation by this battalion. He listed all the 4 battalions. So it can't be combat ineffective if they're out there destroying your tanks. Like, that's just not how it works, because it's not a guerrilla army. We're still seeing Qassam operate as a national army. And that's something that I've been saying for 10 months that we've been keeping our eyes on, because once you see them move into the stage of guerrilla warfare, then maybe you could look at their battalions and see how they've been impacted. But we're not seeing that.
Yeah.
We're seeing structured military responses.
Yeah,
so.
We sure are. One more question for you, Jon. And this is somewhat related. I mean, Israel is lying about the battalions in Gaza. They lie about everything, obviously. But this is about the count of their own soldiers' deaths. So Yediot Ahronot, one of the major Israeli newspapers, says that no less than 10,000 soldiers who were killed or wounded during the long months of fighting in the Gaza Strip are missing from the Israeli army today. According to the data of the Ministry of Defense's Rehabilitation Division, every month about 1,000 new soldiers join the ranks of the physically and mentally wounded. None of this has stopped the Knesset and the government from smearing the legislation of the law, extending the mandatory service, and leaving the regular soldiers in the Israeli army in great frustration and with question marks. So we're saying the army is suffering from a shortage of at least 10,000 soldiers killed or wounded during the long months of fighting. What do you make of this? What do we know about the Israeli casualty figures? If we know anything, again.
We don't know. We don't know. They don't match. They don't ever match. They very rarely match. The sniper operation that we showed with the soldier hanging out of the tank, they acknowledged that one because, for whatever reason, that one was acknowledged and you can track it and connect it. But one of the jobs that I do is to try to match the operations, what the Israelis say they're doing, what the Qassam brigades are doing, and see if you can make them match. When we watch a video of a booby-trapped home where we just saw 9 triangles entering that home, you look for a 9 triangle, you just don't find it. Mass casualty events, you just don't find being reported. The Israelis report at this time, they're reporting like 1 or 2 deaths a week. And we watch videos where we're seeing multiple killed on each battlefront. So they've been lying about their casualties. I don't know any other way to say it. I'm pretty confident when you see numbers like this, the rehab division is the defense ministry's rehab division. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why the rehab division statistics come out is because, like, through the military censor. The military censor is the reason why we don't know the casualties. They're hiding them. And they have to be approved by the military censor. But I believe that the reason these rehab division from the defense ministry stats get out is because they need additional funding from the government. So the defense ministry is allowing these stats to come out because these stats, 10,000, that's consistent with what the rehab division has been saying. The rehabilitation division of the defense ministry has been saying for months. In June, the number was 7,000. So they've added 3,000, which matches this number. They're adding 1,000 soldiers a month to their casualty list. But if you go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs casualty list, it runs a daily casualty list. It's nothing even close to that. If you go to the IDF's casualty list, which they acknowledge their casualties, it's under 2,000. And it stays there, even though we see operations this week, like in Rafah. They just announced, I'm not sure if I read it on air, but they announced that there was 8 wounded soldiers in one of those booby traps. You don't see the number spike. They seem to stay at the same number all the time. So I think it's fair to say they're lying about their casualties. I reported on this a number of times, but one time back in December, it looked like Haaretz was pressuring the IDF to release the numbers, and they were going to the hospitals and trying to get numbers from each of the hospitals. And then that was the 10th of December. I have the numbers here. 10,548 soldiers were wounded and admitted to hospital between October 7th and December 10th. So in December 10th, there was 10,000.
Yeah.
And then the war has gone on for 250 days since then. Yeah. So something's not adding up. But what we do know that there are IDF spokespersons, soldiers in every single hospital controlling information. And this is one of the things that the Haaretz article was trying to, it seemed like Haaretz was going to expose them. And, this was the article where they listed the hospitals, like, the Ashkelon hospital alone, 3,000 people in that hospital alone, 1,500 of them in Ashdod, Barzillai, 2,000 admitted in those ones. You have entire hospitals in December when there'd only been 35 days of ground war, putting out these numbers that if those would continue, or even if they continued and then were in decline, would get you far above 10,000. So it's not clear exactly why the rehab numbers come out, but these are people who are seriously wounded, who have lost limbs and are learning how to walk. There's talk in the Israeli media about how Israel needs to really expand their accessibility. Like people saying, like, we park our cars on the sidewalks, like we can't do that anymore. We need to have ramps into buildings, because they have so many wounded soldiers in wheelchairs that they're going to need to change the physical infrastructure of their cities to accommodate the costs that this war has taken. And so I don't know how deeply they can lie about the numbers, like and how long they can do it, but they're clearly hiding their casualties because it lowers the morale and it makes it look like they're not being successful in the war, and they have a conscription army who might not want to know what the total number is. But this goes against Israel's history. They used to put the names of people out right away, or reasonably right away. And then, was it on Yom Kippur where they like list the names on TV, right? Like on a scroll on TV. That's not what's happening this time.
Interesting. Well, thank you for that. And one day we'll get a spreadsheet, maybe. We'll see. Asa, I wanted to turn to you finally. People have been asking about what is going on in the UK and the connection between these, these racist mobs around the streets and what they have to do with Palestine and the genocide in Gaza.
Well, what is ever going on in the UK? I mean, it's increasingly starts to look like a failed state. The reality is, the sad thing that's happening in the UK simply is that there is anti-Muslim race riots happening. That's what's happening, and the background to it and the primary cause to it really is just years and decades of successive governments and successive mainstream media scapegoating and demonizing Muslims in particular and immigrants in general in this country. And in a way, these riots that we've seen draw on a tradition of British fascism, although it's not really, doesn't seem to be quite as, the far right isn't as organized as it has been in other times in history, but this is kind of a new phenomenon and seems to be happening. But I mean, I think as well, it's important to say that these things don't come in a vacuum, right? That there is, it seems to me, or I'm increasingly getting a feeling there is a connection to the demonization of the Palestine solidarity protests that have happened, because we're seeing very different policing, right? The right-wing press at the moment is accusing the police of they're sort of supporting these riots that have been happening. Certain right-wing press figures have been doing that and sort of saying, well, you didn't crack down on the Palestine, the previous government was calling the Palestine solidarity protests hate marches, which was
right.
Completely ridiculous. And what we're seeing now is actual riots and violence targeting primarily Muslims and immigrants in general. But also, there is an Israel connection. So first of all, there's this story that I was just seeing in Middle East Eye, which I think Tamara has got for us. An Israeli politician and settler, Aria King, who's a settler from Britain, whose parents settled in occupied Jerusalem from Britain, and he has been, as it says, been accused of stoking the race riots in the UK. And we can scroll down to his tweet, I think, where he is putting out this sort of typical Islamophobia, where he's saying the police are helping Muslims to take over Britain. And this is the kind of racism that, it's kind of Israelification of Britain in some ways. And let's not forget, one of the main and most prominent agitators for these anti-immigrant riots, violence, has been, of course, Tommy Robinson. the so-called Tommy Robinson, this is him here. It's not his real name. His real name is apparently Stephen Yaxley Lennon, but he changed it, apparently, from what I heard, he changed his name to Tommy Robinson because it sounds more English, right? This is a photo of him from 2016 in occupied southwestern Syria, i.e. the Golan Heights, posing with Israeli occupation troops in occupied Syria. And this is he's a leading faction of the British far right, which has for many years a fact that pro-Israel lobby groups that are very close to the state of Israel itself have been pumping cash and funding into this pro-Israel and pro-Zionist faction of the British far right, which is really the only salient part of the British far right these days. It is pro-Israel, pro-Zionist, and that is the reality of it. We don't have time to get into all of that, obviously. I've done some reporting on it in the past. There's also quite a good tweet thread that if you go to my Twitter, at Asa Winstanley, by Lowkey, which has got some good research there. You can also look up Tommy Robinson on the Electronic Intifada's website, electronicintifada.net. You can see some of our past reporting on it there, notably during the last major Israeli war against the Gaza Strip, population of the Gaza Strip in 2021. Tommy Robinson joined the official pro-Israel demonstration, which was fairly small but used quite a lot of violent and racist rhetoric in London. And he was, despite the leaders of the march putting on a show of distancing themselves from him, he was welcomed on the ground by the protesters there. So there's this quite long-running history between Tommy Robinson in particular and the British Zionist movement.
Thanks for that, Asa. Disturbing, as always, news coming out from the UK. Just rolling on. All right, so let's take a look at the website. We have, obviously just an incredible amount of features coming out from our contributors in Gaza. I just wanted to plug it and plug their writing. Just an extraordinary amount of features that people are sending us through WhatsApp and on email with very limited internet, and to make sure that those voices are supported and that we can continue to do this work, please head on over to the Electronic Intifada website, click the Donate Now link. It's extremely we are just extremely grateful for that support and for being able to support our writers, especially in Gaza. A couple of comments. Thank you so much to everyone who has been watching and listening to this today. Ali will be back next week, we promise. As always, thank you so much to Tamara behind the scenes. And to Maureen for pre-production and writing, and to Ellie Gerzon for their incredible social media. So thank you again, everyone, for watching. We will be back next week, and stay safe.